Hi, my name's Don. Welcome back to Project Urtle. This episode covers the installation of the deck on the chassis that we built in last episode. The deck material, I had basically two options. The first one was a composite panel which Styromax supplies, and it's a really nice product. If you have a look at this, it's about 12 millimeters thick. It's a composite foam with glass reinforcing in it. It's extremely rigid, quite light, and impervious to just about anything you want to name. And it's just ideal for this kind of application. However, my budget got in the way. So I went looking for alternatives, and the most obvious alternative is plain ordinary 12mm plywood. But it misses out on a lot of the advantages of this material. The plywood, of course, can soak up water. It's relatively easily damaged in comparison. It can rot, those kind of things. So in order to make this a viable alternative, I had to take into consideration some kind of waterproofing system. And with my past experience in making small boats, epoxy resin and fiberglass was the obvious choice. And I did the calculations. In fact, these two pieces are identical size. I weighed them, and in the overall weight department, the plywood deck complete with the epoxy and fiberglass on it was going to come out around about 3 kilograms heavier than if I'd used this nice material. But the price was going to be about 30% of the other material. So it really was a no-brainer. I couldn't afford the other material. Plywood it had to be, and so this episode covers the use of the plywood, the preparation of it, and installation on the deck. Okay, so building this deck required just cutting some sheets of 12mm pine plywood to size, and then fitting it around a few of the obstacles in the way. Here I've cut a slot in the side to allow the fuel filler point to protrude up through the deck, and used the router to round over the ends of the panels where there were some weld beads on the chassis that I didn't want to grind flat because that would weaken it. And so here we've just rounded things over, got things to the right shape. Then the next job was to do a half lap joint between the two sheets that I needed to make up the full width of the deck. I just used the router to fairly roughly cut a half lap joint, touched it up a little bit with a block plane, and then glued the two panels together using thickened epoxy. So once the panels were glued together, I flipped it over and gave it a quick coat of slightly tinted epoxy, and that of course made all the grain stand up on end, and required a quick sand to flatten it off. Now I've starting to mix up another coat of epoxy. This will be used to bond down the fiberglass that I'm coating the bottom surface with. mix up small batches as I'm going, as I need them. That way I don't end up with a great lot of epoxy left over. And I reduce the risk of having the epoxy still in the pot, getting hot and setting on me early before I've had a chance to use it. How do I know? Had trouble before, I've been there and done that. So, small is beautiful. I don't want miles and miles of resin in this. I want to keep it fairly light, just enough to properly saturate the cloth. I'm not really looking to build up anything more than a pretty tough surface on the fly. And this will be the side that is facing down towards the road, so it's going to get the occasional stone impact. Okay, well that didn't take terribly long. Lots of little batches, and it went down very well. I didn't bother cutting the fiberglass to exact size. I just overlapped it in the middle, and that just gave it a little bit more rigidity down the centre where most of the foot traffic will be. I've just left the glass overhanging the edges, and in an hour or two, when the epoxy has almost set, I'll come along and trim the edge with a Stanley knife while the epoxy is still green, and that'll cut away very easily then with no mess and no dust. Okay, so after glassing and epoxy coating the bottom side, I flipped it over and put 2 coats of epoxy on the top surface just to seal it, because this is going to be out in the weather for weeks to months while I'm waiting for the body kit to come. Plus it just means that plywood is now pretty much impervious to water and rot, and that's all good. Some kind of floor covering will go on this at some point in time, but inside of cupboards, etc., this will probably be the finish. I forgot to video bonding that deck down, of course. I used a polyurethane adhesive like Sikaflex to bond the ply down to the aluminium chassis, and I haven't screwed it down at all. There's really no issue with that. The floor can't go anywhere. It's not structural, other than providing a bit of stiffening to the chassis, and the polyurethane adhesive is very solid. There's no way that's coming off by itself. The next job was to fit some tie-down brackets to the deck in the area which is the what I call the through boot. There'll be a door on each end of this area which allows me to store long things, bulky things, with easy access to outside. And what I plan to have in there is a spare tyre, a second spare tyre, and some place for jerry cans of extra fuel. Some of the trips I would like to take requires me to get about 5 days of travelling through desert country where there are no fuel stops at all. So if I'm to proceed through the desert, I need to be able to refill. So there will be times when I load 5 or 6 20-litre jerry cans into this area, and so they need to be mounted down very strongly on rough roads. So that's what is going on here. These tie down points I have recessed into the deck, screw them through to the chassis in most points, and seal them to the deck with a polyurethane sealant. Now, because I've kept the chassis down very, very low, the fuel filler protrudes above deck height. So it needs some protection. It's going to be inside of a cupboard, but I don't want the chance of any spills while refueling to run in on the inside of the vehicle. So there'll be a cover over this sealed down. Now, I asked Adrian to make me another piece of aluminium, and he did this lovely job here. I'll show you. So having made that nice aluminium cover, when I picked it up, it was very, very obvious that it was a lot of overkill. It's 3mm aluminium, and now aluminium's light, but not that light. And so this cover weighs almost a kilogram. So I thought, well, maybe I can use that as a mould and mould a part out of carbon fibre that would do exactly the same job but with less weight. And so no sooner said than done. There's the part. And that can be bonded down to the deck, and it's solid, hard, weighs less than 200 grams. And I've saved 800 grams. Now, 800 grams in a 500 kilogram build isn't a lot, but if I don't start doing this from the very get-go, I'm going to be in trouble. Okay, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe so that you don't miss future episodes. The next episode will cover building some small items, and these items are really just fill-in jobs while I'm waiting for my body kit to arrive. Bye.